Today's episode is about the profound influence our thoughts have over our future. We'll dive into the intricate workings of our thoughts and how they shape our lives. In particular, we'll examine the neuroscience of thoughts, the relationship between our heart and thoughts, and the impact they have over human beings physically and spiritually. How do you think in your life? Have you made up your mind and what defines your life's outcome?
Welcome everyone to episode 3 of Absolute Faith Within. Yes, oh my gosh, we made it to our third episode. And today we are going to talk about how our thoughts play a significant role in determining our future. So to start, Kira, our first question is, how would you describe the relationship between our thoughts and our destiny?
On a very basic level, what we think influences what we do. Everything we do has a cause and effect relationship. We all know that the brain is the central organ of the body, so naturally, all of the processes, the things that we think that ultimately it influences our body. Like it's in the neuroscience, which we'll dive into later. But I think at a very basic level, that's how I would describe it. But spiritually speaking, our thoughts are tied to our relationship with faith, and especially in our relationship with God, because our thoughts often influence our actions and the things that we hold. It will inevitably have an effect on how we're able to live out a life of faith. And it even affects our spirits. And Descartes has a very famous quote: I think, therefore I am. And so I would say that this essentially hints at this idea that the sum of who we are is reflected in our thoughts. And to clarify, this doesn't mean that if you have self-deprecating thoughts that you're a bad human being, but we can usually tell the type of person and character that we are, or at least see our actions reflected in the things that we're constantly thinking about. And for example, in science, like when scientists have examined the brains of serial killers, usually they have more thoughts towards aggression and control and power. It's just like they're constantly thinking about who they're going to hurt and their prey versus, someone who's a humanitarian, for example, that usually these are people who are thinking about helping people. Like, how can I solve different problems in the world? They have a lot of empathy. And so, really, there's this direct correlation with the thoughts and our actions. And of course, we know we should think before we act. And so sometimes we can have control over a specific situation, like am I going to act on my thoughts or not? But usually how we think habitually is reflected in how we take action every day. And so what about you, Erica?
Yes, I think everything you said was truly true, Kira, how our thought shapes our destiny and how it plays a significant role in influencing our perceptions, beliefs, actions, and truly it affects the trajectory of our lives. And I think one thing about our thoughts is that it really shapes the perception of our world around us as well and influences how we interpret and respond to different situations. So, for instance, when we consistently entertain negative thoughts about ourselves, such as saying that maybe I'm not good enough or I'll never succeed, and personally, I'm guilty to that, but it's likely that our actions will reflect these beliefs, and as a consequence, we start to shy away from a lot of opportunities. We start to procrastinate, or sometimes people even they tend to engage in self sabotaging behaviors or thoughts. But on the other hand, once we start to cultivate positive thoughts, it helps empowers us to take proactive steps towards our goals. And we approach challenges with resilience, and we're able to even have healthier relationships with others and most importantly ourselves. So for you, Kira, have you ever had those kind of thoughts, or I guess have you ever had like a self-sabotaging thoughts?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, I would say, definitely growing up, I was extremely self-critical. I often placed my worth in my achievements. And so if I didn't get something right away, then it was just like, it's like putting myself down and
Mm-hmm.
diminishing my worth. But even beyond that, I think when I was younger, I did struggle with depression and anxiety as
Mhm.
as pretty much every single Gen Zer has experienced at this point.
We're all just depressed. Depressed generation.
Yeah. But definitely, in high school and middle school, I mean, and that's a time too where our bodies are going through changes. So we're quite literally, going through these like psychological, physiological, neurological changes, all of these hormonal changes in our body that it's not just in our body, but it's also in our minds. And you've got a bunch of volatile teens. They don't treat you well. They don't treat each other well, unfortunately. And so it's just like, yeah, a mix of those being imbalanced, physiologically, but also, all of these social pressures. Sometimes you just can't help but have those negative thoughts. But I would say still, like, even as a young person, when I would fall into bouts of depression, like, I would push myself out of it. I was just like, no, depression is a choice. I'm going to push myself out of it. Like, I would just like, no, I'm going to think positive and I'm going to do these things. And, and I do want to, just insert a clarification too. Like, sometimes you really do need help at a certain point. There's a time where you do need,
Right.
you may need some type of medical intervention, but uh, I do think a lot of mental health issues, they can, if you address them early on, like if you have certain symptoms, these are things that you can address by changing your habits. And that's something that I tried to do a lot when I was, in a quote unquote funk. Uh, but yeah, what about you? Have you experienced any depression or just, yeah, just times where you could not control your thoughts or struggled with your thoughts?
Um, yeah, definitely when I was growing up, I think I considered myself an achiever. And at one point when things were not working out in the way I wanted them to, I remember being very harsh on myself, especially when I was in high school. I would really beat myself to the ground, telling myself, maybe I'm not just good enough. And there were nights that I remember that I won't be able to fall asleep because I was overthinking so much. And the hard part of this is that in the past, it was hard for me to express my emotions or feelings to others. Like, I personally think I'm a good listener, but when it comes to my own problems, I'd usually bottle them up. Maybe that's also an only child thing, but thankfully, I've gotten better over time. And of course, I'm still working on that aspect of my character to really be more expressive because I think my inability to communicate my emotions well in the past really did cause a lot of misunderstandings with some of my close friends and especially with my parents. But I think even though I had those negative thoughts, I don't think it ever came to a point where I became depressed because of it. Like, if I can recall a time in my life that I felt depressed, it was mostly because of other people. It was more like, "Why are you all like this?" And then I think people's actions affected me so much that, I had to really learn how to separate the thought of what I could control and what I could not control. And also learning how to not absorb people's emotions, because I think I'm also an empath. And sometimes you cannot control that. You absorb every negative or positive emotions that other people that you are surrounded with. And by doing that, it really helped me think more in a positive way and learn how to let go of things because in the past, I really like being in control of things. But at the same time, I had to realize and learn that things will just not always work out. And yeah, I think throughout the years, I was able to learn different coping mechanisms. And I really think the most important part is having that self awareness and acknowledgement of our thoughts, our own thoughts. What are we thinking when we are in certain situation, and so that we can address it better. So as we talk about this on how thoughts are affecting us right now, Kira, could you talk a little bit more about how thoughts impact our society?
Yeah, I think it starts with the individual first because societies, they're made up of people. And so naturally, I think if you are not able to control your own thoughts, your own life, and that in turn comes out in your actions and actions that are not honorable and you interact with other people, naturally other people will be affected as well. And those people, it's like a ripple effect. It's
Mm-hmm.
almost like one person's bad day becomes other people's bad day if they let it. Because again, we all have control over our
Right.
own thoughts. And so there's actually this quote from a Stoic philosopher, Marcus Aurelius, who says, "The happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts. Therefore, guard accordingly and take care of that you entertain no notions unsuitable to virtue and a reasonable nature." And even then, like, we think about the ancients, like a lot of people had this deep understanding that almost everything that we do, it starts from the seed of our thoughts. Um,
Mhm.
And we even get this warning biblically, there's that scripture that's like, above all else, guard your heart because it is the wellspring of life.
Mhm.
And so I think, yeah, the biggest thing is just that, yeah, when you take action, when you think poor thoughts, usually you're gonna take action poorly. When you think good thoughts consistently, you're gonna take action well. Yeah, I'm like, I don't wanna overcomplicate it. I think it's actually very simple. Maybe it's not always easy to manage your thoughts and take action well, but
Right.
the concept itself is easy. Just like manage your thoughts and you should be able to take action well. But that's just more of an individual thing. Do you have anything to add as far as like society at a broader level?
Yeah, at a broader level, I think societal impact, when we think about it, a lot of cultural movements like political ideologies and, paradigm even, I think it all came from the thoughts and beliefs of individuals within society. So it's really amazing to think that because from one thought, it creates either something beautiful or something like a revolution. And especially here in the US, we've experienced that so much. But the thought itself is really powerful and it starts from one idea. And just like you mentioned, it's like a ripple effect. That one thought, it becomes a collective thoughts that come together and people come together and we're able to create something that is either good or bad based on the thoughts, on those thoughts that we started. But it definitely, everything that we're experiencing right now in the world, it's really all started with a simple idea or a thought. And those thoughts could really lead to social change and revolution, and even just for the evolution of our civilization as well.
Yeah, and I think the condition of our society currently has a lot to do with the spiritual state of things. Like, I think we as humans, naturally, we are inclined towards something greater than ourselves. We're always looking for purpose and something that will feed and nourish our souls. And of course, people have different ideas of what they think is nourishing to their souls and spirits. But I think the biggest impact that thoughts have is on ourselves, on our spiritual nature. And that's something that we can dive into a bit later in another episode. But it's so important that we think not just about the present physical moment, but think about the lingering effects, the things that we think and do. Like, what is that doing to our souls, to our spirits? And how is that shaping who we will be eternally?
Yes. So now that we have covered how our thoughts impact our society, how it affects us individually and even spiritually, for you, Kira, do you think we have the power to overcome our thoughts? Like, what do you think about that?
Absolutely. And I think our ability to overcome negative thought patterns and control our thoughts really comes down to the habits that we take every day. And there's actually this one quote from a sermon that's like, you know, sometimes you need to receive inspiration to take action, but more often than not, sometimes you need to take action to receive inspiration. And I think that's so true about our habits. Like, we're always waiting for
Mhm.
something to change in our lives, but we have to just do it. We have to take action. And the beautiful thing about science and neuroscience specifically is that because of our understanding of the brain, we know that through our habits, we can actually shape, we can literally rewire our brain. And Dr. Laurie Desautels explains it in this idea of neuroplasticity. She says neuroplasticity is how our nervous system produce and create feelings, thoughts, and behaviors through a process of structural and therefore functional change. And so through our thoughts and through our actions, and especially through our actions, we can actually reshape our nervous system. So we're changing the structure, the pathways of our neurons. And from there, it's physically reflected in the functionality of our lives as well.
Right. I actually love the topic of neuroplasticity because the idea that physiologically we're able to change, that our brain is actually capable of changing throughout our life, it's really fascinating. The reason for this is because I think a lot of people do believe that once they develop certain things or act a certain way, they just feel like, or they just think that they cannot change it anymore. And so people feel like they are already doomed, but it's actually not like that. And it's really hopeful to learn about this. And based on science, there are two kinds of neuroplasticity. One is called the experience dependent neuroplasticity, which is a passive process of reinforcing our habits as we do them unconsciously over and over again, regardless of whether they are good or bad habits. On the other hand, we have this thing called self directed neuroplasticity, which is an active process of consciously reflecting on how habits make us feel. So I think it's very important to understand both of this because, a lot of times we unconsciously develop habits and we don't even realize if they are good for us or not. And oftentimes we do things because we like them, but without really considering if it's going to be beneficial to us or not. So it's really important to learn about self-directed neuroplasticity because we need to be able to learn on how to reflect on the things that we are doing. And really, just because something feels good in a moment, it doesn't mean that it's good for our long-term happiness, our health, or even our social relationships and mental wellness. And also, just because something is uncomfortable doesn't mean that it is dangerous. Because many times, especially for our generation, I think people are afraid to change or they are afraid of growth without realizing that when we do want to change, it's going to be awkward, it's going to be uncomfortable, and we just need to acknowledge and embrace that. Yes, everyone, we do truly have the power to overcome our thoughts and change certain patterns that we engage in each day.
And a big part of being able to change is self awareness. We have to be able to assess ourselves, know clearly what our bad habits are, what our thoughts are. Like if there are certain thoughts that consistently pop up in your mind and your brain that you find yourself ruminating over, write these down so you can know, okay, these are the thought patterns that I need to change. But also actions, if there are certain habits that you want to change in your life, write down those habits and think what are the thoughts that are directly correlated with these habits? And be realistic with yourself as well. And by realistic, yeah, you have to be clear and say, like, this is what I'm doing and I need to change. But also, a big part of that self awareness, or at least that mindfulness about your thoughts, is knowing the source of them. Like, we have our own thoughts that we have to put in check, but also know that the enemy, Satan, also attacks us through our thoughts. Because there are certain things like we receive a thought and it's hurtful, but we know it's not true. And yet it feels so real. And there's actually the scripture that's from Ephesians 6:12 that says, for our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. And so we have negative thoughts oftentimes due to our own bad habits that have shaped our thoughts. However, we can make up our minds to reshape those habits and thoughts as well, but also still understanding that sometimes those bad thoughts, it's because there's this spiritual force or enemy that doesn't want us to succeed, that doesn't want us to do well. And if you can realize that and overcome it, then that much more you can say like, hey, like, no, I am like the owner of my life with God. I'm going to cut off what I know is not true, and that much more you can overcome it.
Yes, I think that is so important because often we think without really considering our thoughts, and then we start to act on those thoughts, and those actions become our habits, regardless of whether they are good or not. So it's really crucial to be mindful of our thought patterns and actively challenge negative thoughts or limiting beliefs that we have. So, additionally, practicing gratitude and affirmations can help us change our thoughts and reframe what we tell ourselves. So, for example, we do tend to think a lot that we have to get everything done perfectly, which could lead to stress and even depression. But there's actually a Japanese technique that I came across the other day. It's called Kaizen. It focuses on making small improvements every day, aiming to become 1% better each day. And when you think about this, if you just try to be 1% better each day, at the end of the year, you'll be 37% better. Just like how money compounds or multiplies, our habits also does the same thing. So it's really important to reframe how we think about our goals and our perspectives, even regarding other people, because these thoughts can also affect our relationships, especially in my role as a teacher. When I deal with my students, I always try to reflect on myself first and remain self-aware of how I treat them. Um, I remind myself to change my perception towards my students because of a lot of times, a lot of teachers, it's a problem that instead of perceiving them as immature or responsible, I try to acknowledge that they need assistance and consider where they are in their lives, that maybe, they need help with time management. They still need help prioritizing tasks and developing social skills. So, reflecting on my thoughts really helped me in my job, which allows me to avoid assuming negative things about my students. And instead, I try to take a step back to understand their needs. So, being aware of our thoughts is really crucial because it can greatly affect our relationships and interactions with those people around us, as we had mentioned earlier, too.
And on the topic of people and changing our perspective, I think it's also important to know who we are surrounding ourselves with, because usually the
Right.
people who are around us most, they're the people who influence how we think. And and sometimes that's not for the better. There are people who can influence you to think negatively, in worse ways.
Mhm.
And there's actually this great quote that a lot of entrepreneurs use. It's that your network is your net worth. And so literally how it's it's almost equating your value to those around you, which of course it's not that your value is determined by people around you, but it's like, yeah, again, because the people around you, like if you're not a smoker and you hang around a bunch of smokers, there's a very high chance that eventually you're going to become a smoker. Or if you let's say you're not the best with money, but everyone else around you is really great with money, there's a likely chance that you'll be influenced in the direction of like, maybe I should be more responsible. Because as humans, we often try to find comfort in our downfalls by other people. We're like, oh, well, this person is also not eating healthy, so it's fine. I'm just not going to eat healthy. We can just be unhealthy together. And and of course we can joke about it in the moment, but when we really think about our lives and the habits that we are setting, it's really important that the people around us are also going to be people who encourage and facilitate
Right.
growth within us. And I guess, spiritually speaking, going back to last week's discussion on values, there's this scripture in Romans 12:2 that says, "Do not conform to the patterns of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you'll be able to test and approve God's will, his good, pleasing, and perfect will." And just touching on the first part of it, it's like, do not conform to the patterns of this world, but, be transformed, renew your mind. And I think there's so much chaos because people, they don't have a clear set of values, a clear direction, or they allow themselves to just, they just flow with the culture. Like we should really be
Right.
striving to be people who shape culture for the better, not just follow everything that's in culture. And of course, it's not to say that culture is bad, but there are good parts and there are bad parts of culture. And we should be really careful about which way we flow and what we place value in. And actually, on this note, Erica, one thing that just came to mind is this topic of like, what do you do when you're outgrowing your friendships? Because I think it's so often the case that we we kind of realize, okay, like I want to change, but the people closest to me or around me, they're not on the same page. They're satisfied where they are. They're not interested in growing. And you know that if you stay close in those relationships and those friendships, you're not going to be able to grow or it's going to be extremely difficult. And so, have you ever experienced a situation in which you knew you needed to cut off a relationship, whether it was a friendship, family, an actual relationship, in order for you to grow? And how did
Um,
you do it?
um, Yeah, I remember there was a point when I started my faith journey. At the time I realized I was starting to walk a different path compared to my close friends, and they couldn't understand what I was suddenly changing, why I wasn't doing things with them anymore. It was hard because I do love my friends, they're great, and they've always been good to me, but there came a point where we started to have different beliefs and lifestyles. I had some friends who love drinking, and in the past I used to drink, but I cannot drink anymore. And it's not just spiritually, but I knew it wasn't good for my mental and physical health, and I wanted to stop before a time comes when I know I may not be able to control it. But that's when also I realized our goals weren't aligned anymore. I accepted that we were walking different paths and started to set boundaries, and we just naturally drifted apart at one point. And at the time, it was really about acceptance. I tried to share my reasons with them, but we cannot force people to agree with us. And thankfully, I remained good friends with them, but I definitely had to set some boundaries. And that's when I realized that it comes down to acceptance. Just because we are with someone or a group of friends, it doesn't mean that we'll always be on the same page. And of course, we all remain respectful to each other without judging each other. And I just had to prioritize what I wanted and go for that. I also sought new connections and nurtured relationships with people who I shared my beliefs and goals with. And, it wasn't easy to lose some close friends along the way, but I think it was needed for my growth. But how about you, Kira? Have you ever experienced something similar? And what did you do when you felt like you had to cut off those people in your life in order for you to grow?
Yeah, I've definitely experienced moments like that. But one thing I will say is that for most of my life, I have been very intentional about who I surround myself with. I mean, I'm very like open. Like I loved hanging out with all different types of people, even people who maybe think something that, could be weird or taboo. Sometimes I would get to know them. But when it came to really like how I give out my time, I think I was a bit more selective. And I think as I got older, I kind of would just, like, I cut off people, and, like, I think the easiest way is you just kinda naturally leave some space, and I think the one thing that helped me a lot, to be honest, is just that I stayed very, active and busy.
Mhm.
Like, I've always been that person who's, like, doing a million different clubs, like working 3 different jobs, like taking an extra course load. So I think when you're doing all of that, it's just like you don't have time for people to hang out with people who are just
Right.
uh fooling around. Like usually like I don't know, yeah, just for me, like I always would seek out people who are also high achieving and so it's just like it was always this mutual inspiration of like, okay, like you're doing a lot. We don't necessarily agree on every single thing, but we are at least clear on like we're really driving towards specific goals and that we'll support each other in that. And I think too, even with friends, like as far as drinking, like, yeah, ideally finding, having friends that also don't drink, but it's just like you can't control that. Like most people in our society drink and
Mhm.
that's fine. But I think I would set clear boundaries of like, if someone's getting really drunk, I don't want to be there. And
Mhm.
also actually yeah, just setting boundaries. That's one thing. I remember there are times where like especially in the past 4 or 5 years, like, like, maybe if there's a friend I haven't seen in a really long time, like, I'll, meet up, even if they're drinking, just to, like, to catch up with them, but typically, like, I just tell people, like, "Hey, bars aren't my thing, I'll sit this one out." But in terms of, like, people who don't have the right heart and mentality, like, I don't know if I've ever really had to cold turkey cut someone off. During the time where I was going through a major shift, all of the people who I spent the most time with, they were also really high achieving. So it
Mhm.
was just kind of natural. We were all like, yeah, we're all, busy going after our dreams. We love and respect each other, but it's okay. So it was kind of, it was a lot more natural, I'd say.
Right.
And, like, there actually there was one time where there was one person in my life, it wasn't even about, like, a mentality thing, I felt like this person was very needy, like, they were kind of I felt like they were trying to, fulfill some type of emotional loss or, like, a lack of fulfillment in their life.
Uh-huh.
through me or helping me, and it was really uncomfortable. Like, there actually was a moment where I was like, I kind of felt like I was suffocating, but it kind of the
Oh,
situation kind of took care of itself. Like, I don't know what happened. She just kind of cut off. She like got mad about. I don't know. I think she was drunk. Like she was literally drunk and was just like I guess she was feeling insecure and was just like, "You
oh.
think this about me? You think you're better?" Like, "No, I don't." And, like yeah, you're just, just, like,
It's
spewing,
like your own
insecurities in her
thoughts.
drunkenness. Yeah. So so
Yeah,
I'm
I
like, I if
definitely don't think I wanna meet her too.
yeah. So
We went a little too deep. We had to, like, unload
yeah.
that. We had to do some unpacking. Oh gosh, it's okay. It's the hunger and the tiredness.
Today is just the day where all of my past, trauma is just
I know,
coming to
I
the
feel like it
surface.
just I feel like I listened to a lot this morning before we started it, and then and then it kinda mixed with everything else. I think it was really good that you prayed.
Yeah.
I was like, "She's on a roll today." I was like, "I'm here struggling. I'm still trying to wake up trauma from waking up."
Yeah.
But anyway, I think it was a kinda good discussion. But yeah, it's so true. I think, it's really amazing, because I think the same as you. Um, I think at one point, we choose who we wanna hang out with, and I think it's just naturally happen that we hang out with with people who has kinda like the same goals or attitude as us. Like, we do attract the people who are the same as us.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
we attract people similar to us. Like people like to say opposite to attract, but really we
Right.
attract those similar to us.
Yeah, and I think, depending on how much we make ourselves, we do hang out with those similar people as well. So I guess maybe that's why I'm hanging out with you, Kara. So now that we talk about our thoughts, how it impact our society, how it impact us, and how we needed to grow, and caught up, I guess, certain people in our lives as well. Now, how should we think?
Yeah, I think as a woman of faith, our hearts should be aimed at God. Uh, our hearts are our hearts and our thoughts are so deceitful. And the sooner we realize that, I think the sooner we can overcome those negative thoughts because we also will put less weight in them. Because I think sometimes we put so much weight in what we think and our own ideas. And that's not to say that we shouldn't, but it's also to say that our thoughts should not be the priority. Like God's thoughts and ways are so much higher than our own.
Right.
And in Philippians 4:8, it says, finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely and admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, you should think about those things. And so in our lives every day, we should be aiming to think thoughts that are pure, that are lovely, admirable. And because, there's so many different ideas in the world, I think we can find solace in the fact that God's word and character is consistent, and that if we really pray to receive God's thoughts, that we can then we can receive those thoughts. We can think what is good and honorable. And of course, too, like I think as humans, we do have some basic things we can agree on. Like we can agree, I was gonna be like, we can agree that murder is bad, but I know even now, for some reason, people debate over that. But yeah, I think there are certain things, like not murdering people, hopefully not stealing. Of course, there are people who still do it, but with the idea of filling ourselves with what is pure and honorable, I think that's kind of a big to-do list. There's actually another scripture that says, "If an evil spirit leaves a person and goes to a desert, finds no rest, and it comes back and to find its former home to be empty, it'll bring 7 other spirits, more evil than itself." I share this, not to talk about, demonic possession, but with our thoughts too. Maybe we decide we're gonna cut off a habit or we're gonna cut off our certain thoughts. But if we don't make it consistent, if we don't decide I'm going to consistently fill myself up with these positive habits to replace those bad habits, then we will naturally fall back into those bad habits. And so it's so important to fill yourself up with what is good and true and honorable and consistently take action on it in your life so that it becomes your constitution, something that makes up who you are and how you make decisions and take action every day.
Yes, thank you, Kara. I think our thoughts, just like as you said, as women of faith, our thoughts has to be aimed at God, especially with all the ideologies that are surrounding us. And I think with everything that we had mentioned, we need to truly realize that our thoughts, it determines our future. It does determine our destiny. Depending on how we think, we can see things in a good or bad way. And if we have good thoughts, actually, our pastor told us that that is a treasure of the heart. And if we have bad thoughts, then that's when we feel tormented and that's when suffering comes to us. So, really, I think we need to make sure that, as we live our lives, we try our best to really make our not just our body, not just our physical nature, but our heart and thoughts. We have to make sure that we have good thoughts and we also have to make it strong and bold. So, I hope if you're listening to this podcast, I hope we could take a step back and really reflect on how we are thinking about our life, how what kind of thoughts do we have, and we need to start having good thoughts as well. And again, as believers of God, truly it's the word of God that gives us light and direction, and it's his word that allows us to grow, and his word just allows us to make ourselves into the best versions of ourselves as well. Yes, would you like to add anything else to that, Kira?
I would just say step on the brakes of your heart. And to explain that further, it's just we really have to guard our hearts because
Mhm.
our again, our hearts and our desires can be so deceiving. Like as humans, our emotions are so fickle. We're like reeds in the wind. We think
We are.
yeah, we think we know what we want, and then in a second it changes, and then a second
Right.
it changes again. It's like we're always having these life crises, and our hearts are often moved by emotion. Like, it's just like there are so many things around us, whether it's the people that influence our lives, our own emotions that naturally change. We have to just know clearly, like operate knowing that just because something comes to our hearts, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's true. Just because something feels like we have to do it. And of course, this is with discernment. You have to discern too if, about, inspiration that you get in your life. But like there are certain things that we may feel so passionately about that just aren't true. And so just be ready and willing to step on the brakes of your heart when you need to, and, step on the pedal of God's good, pleasing, and perfect will. I think a good action item for all of you, and this is whether you're religious or not, just something that you can try, is to really try praying to know and understand your heart, to clearly know and see where your thoughts lead on a daily basis. And if you are someone who has a relationship with God, really praying for God to search your heart, and to make make known the grievances that may be there within you that God may have, and to lead you towards everlasting life. But yeah, that's
Yes.
all for me.
Yes, that was so beautiful, Kira. Oh, sorry. There was a song that reminded me of "Step on the Brakes of Your Heart." It's like um, "Step on the brakes of your heart." What is that tune? Oh, "Total Eclipse of My Heart."
Oh, total eclipse. I love that. Yeah, you can use that as a transition.
I was like, "What is that song?" It reminded me. Okay, anyway, yes. Yes, to our listeners, I hope that would be able to really take a time to take a step back and really reflect on where our thoughts are right now and what kind of thoughts we have and the life we're living as well, and to truly step on the brakes of our heart and step on the gas pedal of God's heart. So, to our listeners right now, how do you guys overcome your thoughts? So please do answer your questions in the comments below if you're listening on YouTube or Spotify. And next week, we'll be diving into the intricate dance between our spirituality and our career. So thank you guys for listening today.
Yes, thank you all for listening in today. Be sure to follow, like, subscribe, all of the things. And please share this podcast with your friends and check us out on social media at Absolute Faith Within. Bye.